So, Dr. Kraemer, you were one of the first to really describe the acute program variables that make up a workout back in 1983. How did you come up with this cluster, and what impact did they have on workout stimuli or the effect in relation to like the choice of exercise, the order of the exercise, how many sets you do, what resistance load, the rest periods?
I think, first of all, it's really interesting. I think the whole phenomenon of coming up with these particular variable domains came out of work during my doctoral work in multivariate statistics. I basically always tried to relate a lot of the things I did during my doctoral program in physiology and biochemistry, obviously, to resistance exercise to keep my high peak passion and interest for this. I've been working with Dr. Steve Fleck, who was really the first sport physiologist at the Olympic Training Center, along with Dr. Topper Hagerman in 1978. And I'd been undergraduate. We were teammates back at University of Wisconsin La Crosse, where we played football together. And we were getting ready to really wanting to write a book on resistance training. And there were a number of things that really came to bear on this whole thing. And that was the fact that if you look at all the different programs that were out there, even in the early 1980s, you think about all the work that Bob Hoffman did at York Barbell, and then Joe Weider and came up with so many different programs with regard to options, especially in the world of bodybuilding. And reading the All-American Athlete and Muscle and Fitness and Strength and Conditioning aspects, I wanted to know, well, where all these workouts come from. And I happened to be in a multivariate statistics class. I couldn't speak another language, and they didn't take Latin. So I did statistics in computers back in those old days. And what happened was we looked at this construct of cluster analysis. So what I did at the time was I went back and labeled all the different programs I could find in the literature and in the lay literature. And what happens was with cluster analysis, you then have all these labeled concepts, these labeled programs, and then you put them through the statistical analysis and you get a host of different so-called clusters. And then the question is, you draw circles around them and you try to figure out what's in those clusters that makes it commonality or something common. And what I came up with was realistically just something that basically we looked at, and that was the order, the choice of exercise, first of all, the order of exercises, the number of sets, the resistance intensity, and then the rest periods. And all these were just basically domains. Now, what's really interesting, and I know as research continued on, people now have tried to partial out. We've spent a lot of our research time partialing out the role of rest period on the different physiological functions, or the order of large versus small exercise. So all these things have a contribution to a workout. So I was excited, and Dr. Fleck and I were excited. We wrote our first edition of Designing Resistance Training Programs. And basically this particular concept came right up front in what we thought about when designing programs. Now, the criticism is that there's tons of things in each of these domains. And we saw this when I did my cluster analysis. I mean, when you just think of it, all the choices you have for choice of exercise, it includes everything from the type of muscle action to the type of equipment, etc. So it became a fact that you really had a lot to consider as an individual putting a program together with these different particular aspects of program design. So I think the impact of it is that any program that you see on a page, you can analyze with these basic domains, and you can categorize it and kind of understand it a little bit better. Now, the rationale for why things are done is a whole nother question. Why did you choose that? Why did you have these rest periods? And there's physiological aspects to this as well as biomechanical aspects that we then want to look at. And this is what kind of came out of it as well. People started to see that, hey, we have to make sure we're paying attention to these different variables. Many of the early studies in the 1950s and the 1960s, even into the 70s, really didn't pay attention to all these little specifics. That was hard to understand what they actually did. And hopefully what we tried to do with this early type of analysis and kind of proclamation to the field was, hey, whether you're a personal trainer, which came on many years later, whether you're a strength and conditioning professional, whether you're a scientist working in this area, you need to think about the quantification of these different areas so people can understand a little bit about what the stimuli came from, and then maybe put the rationale to it as well. So this was really where it all kind of came out of. And we've done work on it. Other people have done work on it, but it's really just domains of quantification of what that workout is really about to really get a handle on what it might mean as the stimulus fingerprint for that particular workout. So that's really where it really came from.
Which is super important when you think about all the different variables like you just listed, and in relation to the outcome, right? Like sport specific training, right. Bodybuilders versus power lifters versus your athletic population are going to follow potentially these same domains, but in maybe a different order. The reps are going to be different. The sets are going to be different. The intensity, they all matter, right? For the outcome.
And I think that's the key. I mean, it's basically important that you have understanding of what the influence is on your stimuli fingerprint that you're trying to create. And that's where we'll talk a little bit later. We can talk more about that, but it's a stimuli fingerprint. And we learned early on that the fingerprint is very specific. And if you have low volume, and even if you have the same rest or the lower volume, you get a different physiological response and different biomechanical challenges with fatigue based on that. So it matters to understand what you're doing, at least quantify it in these domains, so that people that read a paper or talk about a program in a lay publication can in fact relate to those different phenomenon. Otherwise, you're missing an element that could impact it. And that's why it's so important.
Agreed.